Kangaroo Studios, the AusBiz COB is the key stuff you need to know about the day in business and finance.
Hello, welcome to the COB. I'm Juliette Sally. Great to have your company this Wednesday, the 12th of August. What a busy day on the reporting calendar. The second Wednesday always is when we get the likes of CBA, AGL, we had Suncorp, we had SEEK, we had so many reports out today. Let's have a look at where the local market is finishing the day's trade, and it is a negative session today. CBA dropping on this earnings result. Look, obviously, again, it did better than expected, but investors are somewhat jittery over the economic and property market outlook, given that Matt Commonwealth indicated, similar to what we heard from Westpac earlier in the week, that they have been seeing a downward trend in mortgage loan applications. So that sort of leads us to our themes of the day, including on these banking blues. I had a great conversation with Matt Commonwealth. You can catch that online, ausbiz.com.au, also talking about how they're continuing their push into AI. I thought it was interesting that the RBA governor was asked about whether or not she uses AI yesterday at the press conference. She said, look, she does on the media conference days when she asks ChatGPT what questions she might be getting from journalists. We're also talking about seeking troubles here. Of course, SEEK was a big decliner, leading the communication services lower after its jump in full-year profit for the year was marred by a $200 million write-down. And SPY, the CPI, it's all about the US inflation picture, what that means for the Fed. And I had a really good conversation with Angus Geddes from Fact Profits about what he's looking out for and how it's going to impact the overall bond market as well. Let's get you caught up on how the sectors performed today. We've got Telstra coming through with earnings tomorrow. Telstra was a little weaker. Aussie Broadband was up by about 0.4%. The banks, though, were the key point for us today. And you did see CBA ease after its earnings result. Westpac was also under pressure, along with NAB and ANZ. Macquarie Group down too. And when it came to consumer staples, Woolies, Coles and Metcash all under pressure. But Endeavour Group looked better, as did GrainCorp, and the utilities held up really well with AGL's result there. It was a 1.7% decline in net profit. However, the outlook seemed to impress the market. Origin Energy also did well. And I would point out that Suncorp in the insurance space also did well. So let's get into some of the corporate news. With CBA's cash profit beating expectation, but as I mentioned, flagging a bit of a potential slowdown in the economy. Suncorp there did very well, and it did announce a 10-cent special dividend and an additional $250 million share buyback. AGL, well, its underlying profit fell, as I mentioned. That was due to higher gas costs and weaker wholesale electricity prices, which offset some stronger retail margins, but investors liked the outlook. SEEK's jump in full-year profit, as I mentioned, overshadowed by that write-down. And Premier Investments there, cutting its underlying earnings guidance, and it also said it's going to shut down some of its underperforming stores overseas while opening further Peter Alexander stores here in Australia and New Zealand. Quick look across the board at Bravura Solutions, which had a good day. It reported a near 50% jump in full-year profit. ASX fell after shareholder Rocherville proposed launching federal court action on its behalf over the failed CHESS replacement project. And Fleet Partners has now received 3 takeover offers, with SG Fleet lifting its bid to $4 a share. Let's welcome to the COB our guest, Kai Chen from MPC Markets. Kai, great to have you with us.
Good to be here.
So the weak property market, we're obsessed with property in Australia. It dominated at the RBA press conference today, and we heard from CBA CEO Matt Commonwealth today. What are we seeing?
Yeah, a bit of a relief. Rates been on hold, just say, with the RBA, but as Michelle said, they won't hesitate to raise rates again should inflation come back into play. But again, that's against the backdrop of the federal budget, which came through, and it's really flowing through to the market. We've seen auction clearances really low in the Australian property market, so that's bound to flow on into the REITs as well as the banks as well, where we've seen lower loan applications. And with the banks reporting fairly weak, we're seeing the market come off a little bit.
Do you think CBA's result was weak? I mean, it was still better than what the market was
Yeah,
looking
no,
for.
CBA was okay. CBA, I mean, the market's looking forward a little bit in terms of lower loan applications, but also Westpac reported the other day and wasn't very good. So, we are seeing the beginnings of it flowing through. Whether it gets worse from here is yet to be seen. But I think, obviously with the federal budget, it's fairly large implications for the Australian property market. So I think it's likely to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most of the questions at the conference yesterday were really dedicated to the property market. With that in mind, and with all of the uncertainty, we mentioned CPI in the US, we're seeing a rebound in gold.
Yes, exactly. So I think, we've had about a half a year corrective period from the highs of gold and silver. And I think people were really concerned about really the rate decisions that was come through from both Iran war as well high inflation just in general. So, given that the Fed's been relatively dovish, what hasn't been as hawkish as people were expecting for him to come in. So that's really, gold found a floor at about 4,000. It's tried to test a couple of times, but, we're seeing it come back quite a bit. So.
Let's look at some of the specific earnings. SEEK was the stock of the day on the call. A big hit here, despite the jump in profit. We talked about the write-down, but what did you think was behind that big sell-off?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously, given the Australian and New Zealand, employment market, it hasn't been super strong. We've seen it, the main business line work okay, but really the big item on there was their venture capital and the losses that are coming from there. So from a statutory point of view, that's really impacted it, and we're seeing it reflect in today's share market, the price in the share market. My question raised is what's SEEK doing in venture capital? And perhaps it's not the right thing for them. So, they're looking to sell a portion of that investment. But I think it might be a good call.
And Bravura, look, it surged. So higher revenue and EBITDA growth here. Do you think that surge was, sort of warranted when you look at that 11 gain?
Yeah, it's Bravura is an interesting one because they're aggregated of fintech, and basically, they provide a lot of solutions for the wealth management, insurance industry. But really, the main thing why this has gone up, over 10% today is because they've actually released a special dividend. So they've done incredibly well. The profit is increasing a fair bit, and they've chosen to give back to the shareholders, which has been taken as in a positive note. So it's very strong performance from Bravura.
Now, if we look at this week's action, it was down, then we were up, then we were down again, volatile a little bit, but not sort of major moves. But at the end of last week, we hit a record. Are you sort of quite positive overall on what the earnings momentum we're going to see?
Yeah, it's interesting, because if you look in the US and what's happening, what's caused this rebound, a lot of the SaaS stocks which have been down have come back to life. So I remember actually doing the call, Airbnb, it was spectacular beat as well. So a couple of things that were mentioned, Amazon's reported incredibly well. Microsoft's had a spectacular rebound as well. So, the cloud services are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. There was a big question mark in terms of whether this will continue, the AI, thematic, and so forth. An interesting fact, actually, there's a website called Open Router. So basically, it has all the large language models hosted on there. Compared to a year ago, it was at about $3 trillion tokens a day. In today, it's about 70 trillion. So, in terms of usage, it's definitely there. The hyperscalers are doing really well.
And a quick look at what we might expect in the US session with all these inflation prints coming up.
Yeah, no, I think inflation still remains a persistent macroeconomic theme, right? And I think still given the backdrop of where oil is and the conflict in the Middle East, it's fallen off a bit into the background, but it really hasn't, inflation hasn't come into control, right? So in Australia, we've seen 3 rate hikes. The US, I think they're being a bit more dovish than what generally everyone expects. So I think it's going to persist in the background. It hasn't really changed much fundamentally.
Kai, always good to chat. Thank
Likewise.
you so much. Kai Chen from MPC Markets, bringing it back to stock specifics. And one of the stocks that Kai was talking about, the stock of the day on the call, was SEEK. And Koshi spoke to our experts, Michael Gable from Fairmont Equities, Zach Riaz from Banyan Tree Investment.
Anything that trades on a higher PE multiple with that kind of cyclicality will come under scrutiny post results like this. The overall FY26 result wasn't actually too bad. The only thing I'll add on top of what you've already sort of provided on Seek is that, that whole AI transition or the monetization or the benefits from AI will require potential rising capex.
Look, I wouldn't be a buyer. We rotated out of all of our tech stocks about a year ago, and we're more into the hard assets. So there's nothing in today's result that would want to make me change my mind. Not a fantastic result. They also had a write down on their SaaS investments in their growth fund, so that's weighed on the stock as well. So we've got a situation where I think the outlook from here is challenging. Plus, I think the other headwind for these tech stocks, and this is the reason why I'm not going back into them, long-term yields. So they're obviously marching higher, and that's a headwind for these sort of expensive tech stocks.
All right, a down day, but there's always some winners. Let's have a look at the market leaders in today's session, including Codan, which was up almost 9%, EOS, Alcoa, Retail Group and Liontown Resources. And I would note, as we mentioned earlier, that AGL was among one of the bright spots as well. Let's have a look at the laggards though, and no surprise, Seek, that we've touched on quite a bit. Premier Investments too, as it flagged a little bit of concerns with some of its overseas stores. Super Retail and Lovisa under pressure too. I very much got the impression, being in the room yesterday, that the governor is leaning more towards a potential rate hike. So you are seeing some more weakness coming through from some of these consumer discretionary stocks. Let's have a look at the leaders in the small end of town, including Metallium up almost 29%, and NZ kept salmon as well, while the laggards in the small end of town included Pacific Edge and E-Road, along with Energy Transition, off by more than 7%. Tonight, we are looking out for that CPI print from the US and how that's going to impact the bond market and investor thinking about what the Fed does in September. Also, OPEC's monthly report, as we continue to see the Strait of Hormuz closure drag on energy production and supply, and US crude oil inventories as well. Tomorrow, earnings season, pretty busy. You've got the likes of Telstra, Origin Energy, Transurban Group, IAG. We'll be speaking to the CFO, William McDonnell, and the ASX as well, while much later in the session, tomorrow night, in fact, will be the second quarter US GDP. Okay, let's take a final look at where the local market has finished the day's trade. The CBO 200 there, down 0.5%. The S&P ASX 200 finishing the session lower by 41 points or 0.5% to 9,209 points. So still holding above 9,200, which is quite encouraging to see. We will be back bright and early from 9:45, and don't forget you can catch up with all our reporting season coverage on ausbiz.com.au. There's even a drop down for the reporting season if that's all you're interested in. A lot of great interviews, so do catch up. Not only did we have CBA CEO Matt Common today, AGL CFO Gary Brown, we also had Life 360 CEO Lauren Antonoff, so a lot there for you to catch up on. We'll see you again from 9:45 a.m. Eastern tomorrow.